Thank you, Mel.
Thanks, Mayor, and thank you for the invite, I think. We'll see. Although I'm not quite sure why an austere bunch of clinicians would want to listen to a commissioner on a Saturday afternoon. So first of all, thank you, Mayor. And also, I'll thank a colleague, Phil Howard, because he helped me with a lot of these slides. And a couple of things before I start. One, I'm not a clinical expert with antifungals, so no difficult questions at the end about antifungal use. And also, I haven't got any money with me, sorry. So, but apart from that, we'll shift on. So I thought what I'd do first, because I know we've got a mixed audience, is actually talk about the NHS and where we are at the moment with use of medicines in the round and what we're trying to do with improving value. So we spend about 18 billion, 17.4 billion at the moment on medicines. And what we do know around about that is 5 to 8% of acute admissions to do with taking medicines, avoidable acute admissions. And we know that 50% of patients don't take their medicines as they were meant to. They miss doses. They take the wrong dose. And importantly, we know that bacteria are becoming resistant to our antibiotics. Hence, we have this antimicrobial stewardship. And more worrying as a commissioner for me, because we are responsible for commissioning secondary care services, so what's spent in hospitals, is this graph here, because effectively moving from 2010 up to the present day and beyond, actually, this lower line is spent in primary care, where 80% of our medicines are prescribed. So the volume of medicines, around 80%. 20% in secondary care or in our trusts. But as you can see, not very far off, probably around 2018, 2019, around now, the spend in secondary care is actually going to cross over. So we're spending more on 20% of our medicines than we are in primary care. Now, part of that, I think, is down to some long-term conditions that have remained in hospitals, such as HIV prescribing. But a lot of it's down to the rise in medicines prices. And we've actually doubled our spend in our hospitals since this graph started. So, how do we get maximum value out of our medicines? And I have to say right from the get-go, this isn't about using the cheapest medicine. This is about using the right medicine in the right patient. And Tony was looking at me pointedly when he was asking the question earlier around the fact that it's not about, it's no point in doing a test and then not being able to give the right drug. So it's definitely not about necessarily the cheapest medicine. But we do have to improve the way we use our medicines. And we also, as NHS England, and I'll talk a little bit about specialised commissioning and NHS England later on, we're quite an important organisation. We've got a 98 billion budget, some of which passes down to our clinical commissioning groups. But in specialised services, we have something like a 16 million budget. So we've got a lot of buying power, and we need to use that better. So the Medicines Value Programme, which we really launched on the back of the Accelerated Access Review, which took place last year, reported early this year, and the government responded to it early this year, has 4 strands. First of all, we want to build a policy framework on the way that we pay for our medicines. And in doing so, we want to bring forward some commercial arrangements. Now, in the past in the NHS, under NICE guidance, a lot of the time we have what are called simple discounts. And the medicines coming through now, the things that Tony's interested in, the CAR-T medicines, where it's £800,000 a treatment, and it's a one-off treatment. We can't really pay for that in the way that we pay for medicines now. So we have to think about new ways of doing that. We want to optimise the way medicines are used, and importantly, and I won't use the B word today, but we do have to make sure we've got an efficient supply chain of medicines. So recently, one of the antifungals went west because a factory blew up in Chile. Now, some of these things aren't predictable, but some are, and we need to be aware of these. So, the NHS policy framework. So first of all, we need to make sure that all our patients have equitable and fair access, Part of that's done through NICE guidance, but we still know there's what we call in the UK a bit of a postcode lottery, even with something that's supposed to be mandated through NICE saying you should be using this drug. Antifungals actually don't get reviewed by NICE. There has been no antifungal that's gone through that process. So we have to have a different system to think about antifungals. We want a transparent approach for the industry to understand how we want to price our medicines moving forward so that they come to the table with interesting offers as well. So the NHS is affordable. And we need this overarching pricing and reimbursement framework. And it's sort of apparent to us that, you know, there is a lifetime cycle of a medicine. You'll get the novel azole that came out at the beginning, and it might get a second license or a third license. And then you get competitors coming into the marketplace, and prices come down as that moves forward. And then you get generics coming in. And we need to utilize the fact that generics are coming into the market and shift our patients onto generics as soon as they are there, because clearly that is where the NHS will save quite a lot of money. We have introduced this patient-centered approach that was launched 2 or 3 years back to optimize the use of medicines. I'm particularly involved with the dose banding of chemotherapy, so this is standardizing treatments for chemotherapy. But also within this is best use of antibiotics and the antibiotic stewardship that we're moving forward with. And all of this comes under NHS England as one commissioner, but elsewhere we have what are called clinical commissioning groups. There's 209 of those, making 209 decisions on how to use medicines. So last year we introduced these regional medicines optimization committees, which is actually one committee that will make decisions on how we use medicines moving forward. So hopefully, again for industry in particular, when they're bringing novel agents to the marketplace, we'll get quick decision making on which medicines we'll use and how we'll use them and the criteria we'll use them under. And for licensed medicines in specialised commissioning, all our policy decisions outside of NICE go through a commissioning support group programme, which is run on behalf of us by NICE, and we're hoping to be ahead of the curveball, so we'll actually have commissioning decisions on new medicines before they get launched into the marketplace. So we're hoping to be there certainly within 18 to 24 months. So we mentioned sequence, and I always thought I knew what sequence stood for, but I looked at it this morning, clearly I didn't. So commissioning for quality and innovation is what a sequence stands for. But effectively, for those who don't work in this country, it's about incentivizing trusts to improve their service. So each year, clever people get together and say, where do we need to improve our services? And some of these are national sequence, some of these are mandated sequence. So the antimicrobial stewardship is a mandated sequence. Everybody has to do it. But others you can sort of pick and choose to do. And in fact, the medicines optimization sequence, which is part of specialized commissioning, is one of those where you can actually pick and choose. There's actually 5 triggers within the sequence, but effectively, the trusts get additional payments into the system in order to meet targets that are set by the commissioners. In this case, trigger 1 is a best use of generics and biosimilars when they come into the market. And what we're saying is within 3 months, our new patients should be on the generic version of the drug or the biosimilar version of the drug, or best value biosimilar, because sometimes industry will drop the originated product. And within a year, all existing patients should have been switched across. So this is just one example of where we're going to be using sequence to drive better uptake of medicines, some of which is to drive value, but some of it is actually to have better outcomes. And switching to generics is quite an important thing. This is something that the Business Authority has identified top 20 generics that we can apparently, if all of the prescribing was done with a generic option, could save us sort of £20 million almost. But there's a lot of key issues with switching to generics, and it's probably every single time we've wanted to switch to generic, something's cropped up that's stopped us to a certain extent. So first of all, we need to know the volume that we need in the marketplace. So we need to make sure that the generic houses have enough medicine around to give it to meet the demand. But quite often, particularly where there's lots of choices, not only does the generic get used for its branded counterpart, but we start asking people to switch from other options where the generic is suitable. And in those particular cases, we end up with a shortage. So we need to make sure that that's not happening. And for that reason, we now have a sort of a 10-point plan of what to do when we're going to look at generics. So Fungal went generic. We wanted lots of people to start using it. The factory in Chile blew up. We didn't have any Fungal, and all hell broke loose. So we want to avoid that sort of thing. And just to talk a bit about specialised commissioning. So we came into, specialised commissioning has actually been around for years. We had highly specialised commissioning done at a national level, and then we had a Carter review about 10 years ago that says specialised commissioning should be on a 10 footing, similar to our strategic health authorities. But in 2013, when Lansley had his brilliant idea about reorganising the NHS from, was it the top up or the bottom up? One of those two, we became part of the national commissioning of NHS services, and we actually have 140 services that we directly commission as part of NHS England. So it's quite a lot of stuff that we're responsible for. And around 70% of high-cost medicines, so high-cost medicines are things that are what are called excluded from tariff, and some of you will understand what I'm talking about, and others will be thinking, what is he talking about? Belong to us. And our spend on medicines within specialised commissioning of our 15 billion is about 5 billion. So a third of our spend is on medicines. And of that, around 70 to 80 million is spent on antifungals. And that's not including the likes of fluconazole and itraconazole, which are not excluded as tariff. So, I think I was here to talk about antifungal stewardship. So that was just a very quick run round medicine's value and what we're doing within the NHS, and particularly within NHS England. And we've got together some really good people, I believe, two are sitting here, to talk about how we can introduce antifungal stewardship into the NHS in England. And we're trying to mirror antimicrobial stewardship. Now, I don't need to tell you what antimicrobial stewardship is, but it's kind of, a mass of all these three things, an overarching program, a system for optimizing antimicrobial prescribing, and trying to improve patient outcomes by using the right antibiotics at the right time, or not using an antibiotic at all. And in the NHS in England, we have a 5-year AMR strategy, which is sort of almost coming to an end, but the target is to have a 50% reduction in the number of inappropriate antibiotic prescriptions by 2020. And I'm not going to go into this in any detail. I think you get to see the slides. So there's a sort of a 7-point plan on there, although it seems to be 9 numbers from Phil Howard, about how we're going to take that forward. But it's not just about human health, as you see, it's about animal health as well. So what are the differences between AMS and AFS, so antimicrobial stewardship and antifungal stewardship? Well, first of all, antimicrobials are kind of used quite extensively in primary care as well as secondary care, whereas antifungals are generally used in trusts. First issue there. Antimicrobials are used across all specialities. Antifungals tend to be in the sort of more complex areas, haematology, oncology, critical care, post-organ transplant in major respiratory disease centres. Antibacterials have some problems with adverse effects, but on the other side, there's not a lot of complex interactions with most antimicrobials, whereas antifungals are quite complex. Obviously, you use antifungals in both prophylaxis and treatment. There's very few antibacterials used for prophylaxis. And over the last few years, we've had quite a good pipeline for antifungals. New agents coming to the forefront, whereas, of course, we've had a paucity of antimicrobials. And then the last bullet point over there is quite an important one from a commissioning point of view, because pretty much every antibacterial is in tariff, and a lot of the antifungals are not. And that's kind of the elephant in the room from our discussions early doors with antimicrobial stewardship, because the thing about tariffs, which I'll now explain, so payment by results came in 25 years ago. I looked that up this morning. I couldn't believe it was 25 years ago. And it's a bit of a cottage industry, because basically trusts get paid a fixed fee for doing something like a knee replacement. And every trust gets the same fee. And the whole point of tariffs were to sort of introduce efficiencies into the system and to pay the same price. It was meant to be payment by results, i.e. you do you get a good outcome, you get paid. But that's not really how it works. It's payment by making sure you pay less and less and less for your knee operation. And every year, tariffs do tend to go down. But of course, there are some things that just don't fit into a standard system of payment, and these things are called excluded to tariff. So we have services excluded to tariff, we have devices excluded to tariff, and we have medicines excluded to tariff. And 25 years ago, there was probably about 10 medicines on the excluded to tariff list. It's now nearer 500. And as I say, it's a bit of a cottage industry. But if you think that a trust will get a tariff for an inpatient stay, and some antifungals are in tariff and some are out of tariff, the obvious thing for a trust to do is to say, well, we'll use the out of tariff thing because that brings in more money. And hence the reason why this is a bit of a tricky scenario. But as I say, payment by results, most of the income that comes into trust is through this system. Of course, if you're paying less for an e-operation than the average, which is your tariff, then the trust keeps that money. So that's why it drives efficiency. So trusts, have moved from things like open heart surgery to non-invasive surgery. They've moved from having patients in for 4 days to having them in for a day case. And all of these things drive efficiencies. These prices get an annual review. And as I say, most tariffs come down, but some do go up. And we have things like enhanced tariffs, which also are meant to incentivize trusts to do the right thing. There are some exceptions, though, and as I say, non-tariff medicines include things like chemotherapy, the biologics, all the biologics apart from sort of things like insulin, ex-tariff, all the antivirals for hepatitis C and B, ex-tariff, and the newer antifungals. So, well, pretty much all the antifungals are excluded tariff, apart from fluconazole, itraconazole, and flucytosine. And this list is updated every year, and every year, of course, we get new medicines. A lot of them are high cost, and they just get added to the list. So we need to think about this a bit. There are advantages and disadvantages for commissioners about whether it should be in or out. But the key thing to me, is about incentivizing trusts to do the right thing about excluded drugs. Because with the ex-tariff drugs, trusts just say to us, well, what's in it for us? Because we might be doing all the work and saving the money, but we're not getting any benefit. Hence the reason that we have to incentivize people to do this. Hence the reason why we're thinking about implementing a sequence in 2019 around antifungal stewardship. But of course, before we do all of that, we need to know what the hell's going on. And this is one of the great values of the NHS. We have loads of data. Loads of data. Most of it is rubbish, inaccessible, and meaningless. So we need to start thinking about what we do. This is some data of something called Define. And Define takes all the pharmacy issues, so when something is prescribed and dispensed it picks out all that information from the pharmacy systems. And this is, I know this is a bit old, but this is defined daily doses of all the antifungals around at the time. And of course, you see here, actually, there's a lot of fluconazole use and a lot of itraconazole use, the red and the green, within defined daily doses. But when you switch to actually looking at the costs, how much we pay within the system, then you suddenly see, posaconazole coming at the front, voriconazole. The one thing I do know as a pharmacist is how to say these things sometimes. And you sort of see sort of trends, but there's lots of differences across the country about who's using what. And I know that you will have local reasons for using a particular medicine, but some of this isn't really, you can't really explain it, I don't think, why there's so much variation. So we need alternatives, we need a strategy moving forward to how we affect this. Again, this slide is spend within all the trusts that we monitored at the time. So you can see, again, there's loads of variation between which products are being used across the trusts. So things like giving block contracts to trusts, that's basically, here's your money, you can do what you like, you're not getting any more. I don't like that idea myself because I don't think it leads to good commissioner trust conversations about how best to use NHS resources. We can use therapeutic tenders, so we have a commercial unit that actually goes out and tenders for drugs, and antifungals are part of a regional therapeutic tender that we run every 6 months. I'm told, because these are Phil slides, that caspofungin is the most cost-effective antifungal for empiric use. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm told that by lowering the starting doses of ambisome, we could save a bit of money. And I've also been advised we could change the way we give ambisome prophylactically to maybe use it weekly, and that would save a lot of money on the basis of reducing waste. And I know that, talking to colleagues, that diagnostic testing is something we really need to look at in this arena. How we implement it, and again, pathology is a mystery to me, I have to say. So sorry, any pathologists in the audience, because I don't actually know how we pay for pathology. There must be somewhere that we pay for it. But when new tests come into the system, unlike medicines and unlike devices, there's no sort of system to say, this is a new test. It's not something that we already pay for, therefore we should be finding money to pay for it. So we'll have to really think about that. So this is some of the things I think that we're really talking about and what will lead into a sequence moving forward. So performance measures for an antifungal stewardship program, we'll need to look at some structural measures, we need to look at some process measures, and we need to look at some outcome measures. And this has all been adapted from the antimicrobial stewardship recommendations. So structural measures, as a matter of course, all trusts using antifungals should have a guideline. It seems logical, but you'll be surprised. Just hang on 2 seconds. There needs to be a consensual approach to adherence. We need to restrict some antifungals. I think we do need to save some antifungals for using them. I mean, the gentleman, the case earlier on, should that be being used in all patients, or should it be left to the ones that need it most? Most decisions are made in working hours, and we need to make sure that we can follow up on individual patients. And one of the things we're talking about is producing sort of recommendations about what to do within 24 hours of starting an antifungal, what to do within 48 hours, and so on and so forth. And this was the don't hold your breath, but we asked an audience, how many of you had guidelines? And it's slightly worrying to say that out of the people who answered the questionnaire, that only just over half have guidelines. And I'm even more worried that some people don't know whether they've got guidelines or not. So that's something that we need to certainly improve within our antifungal stewardship program. And again, using Define, we can benchmark different areas. This is hematology, Phil gave me slides for about 6 or 7 different areas, but this is haematology, and this just shows you what the defined database can actually do moving forward, and we do need to use this to try and look at variation. We need some minimum standards of prescribing, so we need things to be documented. We still haven't got e-prescribing across the NHS. In this day and age, I think that's pretty terrible. It is coming, hopefully, but we need to know where the antifungals are being used, because as far as a commissioner is concerned, we get a line saying, well, we might get the drug name, if we're lucky, we might get antifungal, or we might just get medicines across the board. But we have implemented something called a minimum data set, but we don't know what the indications are, and that's something else we need. Therapeutic drug monitoring, again, I'm told that TDM for itraconazole is well established. Voriconazole levels need to be interpreted. TDM for posaconazole is still unclear. But whatever we do, we need to do it to ensure better care for our patients and better outcomes for our patients. And if it produces something that is cost effective and value for money, then we should really be looking at that. Therapeutic streamlining, this is kind of more about de-escalation. We need to start de-escalating treatments, so IV to oral, moving to lower cost medicines like fluconazole when it's appropriate. All of these things we need to start thinking about, and we need it to be a sort of a systemic part of the NHS. And outcome measures, we need to look at obviously what we spend on antifungals, and we need to target specific high-cost drugs. And, you know, I mentioned tariff. There is a conversation going on about whether all the antifungals should go all into tariff, and then the trusts decide how to use the high-cost drugs, high-cost antifungals within that system. I'm probably against that at this point. I think it's too early, but it might be something for the future. So, summary. So we've started looking at antifungal stewardship, I think it's fair to say. We're getting there. What we want to look at is a sort of an overarching guideline for trusts to use. And on the back of that will come a sequence. And with the sequence, obviously, there'll be key performance indicators. And we're looking for trusts to complete that to advise us of how they're using antifungals moving forward. And we may end up, hopefully, with something along these lines. Thank you, Samir. So an empirical antifungal therapy integrated care pathway and a diagnostic-driven antifungal therapy integrated care pathway. But we need to understand what's going on now. So if you do happen to get a questionnaire coming to your trust sometime in the near future, asking you, how do you get your diagnostics? How long does it take to turn it around? How much is it costing you? Please respond to that questionnaire because that is going to feed into what we do in the future. So in summary, we want a single approach to antifungal stewardship. That is not about choosing the antifungal, I have to say. This is about managing the use of antifungals appropriately. We want to be open and transparent. So our challenge is to go out to consultation and seek the views of our colleagues in the NHS. We are clinically led, so this is not about commissioners telling you guys what to do. We've got, as I say, an austere bunch of clinicians who sit on our task and finish group. We obviously want to be patient focused. That's what medicines optimization is all about. And obviously we want to be collaborative. Thank you very much.